understood.
Okay. All right. We'll just take a minute. We're waiting for our third member on the phone, so.
Secretary Richardson is on the phone.
Thank you, Secretary Richardson. This is Kate Brown. We're going to call the meeting to order and very much appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you.
With that, I'm going to call the December 18th, 2018 Land Board meeting. We have Secretary Richardson on the phone and Treasurer Wheeler present. Director Walker, thank you.
Thank you, Governor and members of the Land Board. We'll move through this agenda pretty quickly, items 1 through 6, because I think many people are here for agenda item 7. The first agenda item 1 has 2 meeting minutes for us to approve today, August 14, 2018 and October 16, 2018.
Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, I move approval of the minutes for August 14th and October 16th.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Secretary Richardson. I'm assuming there's no objections to the motion to approve the minutes of August 14th and October 16th, 2018, respectively. Hearing and seeing no objection, so approved.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Governor. And I also want to remind the public they can hear those minutes in their entirety on the website.
Thank you.
All right, agenda item 2 and 3 are pretty short. They're just short little easements that we need approval for. The Land Board approves permanent easements. The department approves all others. This particular one, agenda item 2, is whether the Land Board should approve a request from ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation, for a perpetual easement to construct and maintain the bridge crossing Schooner Creek on Highway 101. And I understand that's where Ryan Mann's mother grew up, was on Schooner Creek, so I'm sure she wants a bridge to be in good shape. The application was not circulated for public comment since the bridge is an existing structure. ODOT's folks, right-of-way folks, are coming to us with more permanent easements on bridges as they do their repairs. This is a bridge preservation project. The bridge was constructed between 1930 and 1949 and has significant corrosion, cracking, and concrete spalling. The primary purpose of the project is to make structural repairs and provide cathodic protection to the bridge. I'm assuming that's a good thing. Minor roadway work is included to match into existing conditions, and compensation is required as this easement falls within Lincoln City's city limits as displayed in Exhibit A, but the compensation is determined pursuant to Oregon statute listed there, and it's only $100. So I think that's pretty cheap. The department recommends that the State Land Board approve the permanent easement to this bridge over Schooner and across Schooner Creek.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, I move approval of the recommendation and approval of the bridge easement on Schooner Creek.
The treasurer moves that the Land Board approve the permanent assessment easement to the Oregon Department of Transportation to construct and maintain and operate a bridge over and across Schooner Creek and Highway 101. Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing and seeing, thank you. Hearing and seeing none, so ordered.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 3, which is another perpetual easement for a bridge crossing the John Day River east of the Willamette Meridian in Wheeler and Wasco counties. The existing ODOT bridge has been in place since 1975. This bridge, the Clarno Bridge, it's got to be related to Bev Clarno's family, don't you think, Governor?
Probably.
It is the only ODOT bridge crossing within DSL's proprietary jurisdiction in Wasco and Wheeler counties. ODOT is seeking a permanent easement and has completed the required bridge survey. This crossing is not within city limits, therefore the statutes do not require any compensatory payment. So this is a freebie. The application was circulated to adjoining property owners, various city, state, and federal resource and permitting agencies and tribal entities. No significant comments were received. Therefore, the department recommends that the State Land Board approve the perpetual easement 60756-EA to the Oregon Department of Transportation for the bridge crossing to maintain and operate the bridge and cables for right-of-way purposes on, over, under, or across the John Day River.
Treasurer Reed.
Madam Chair, I move approval of the recommendation and of the bridge easement over the John Day River.
Treasurer Reed moves approval of the recommendation and the easement over the John Day River. Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing and seeing none, so approved.
All right. Well, we like easements so much, we're going to whip into agenda item 4, and this was the, this is a request for adoption of changes to the administrative rules governing the granting of easements on state-owned trust and non-trust land. Our department decided that our rules were pretty old. They didn't fit well within the multiple uses for our lands. We updated the rates on utility crossings. We took one rule division and split it into two, trust and non-trust, because the land board rules on trust lands, but they do not on non-trust lands. So it was important to define which statutes apply to each. On June 22, 2011, the State Land Board authorized the Oregon Department of State Lands to amend its rules for granting easements on trust and non-trust land, and the purpose of the rulemaking was, as I previously stated, to divide it into two, accommodate statutory and rule changes, update the general provisions, complete rule language changes, recommended by the Department of Justice. They've always got a legal eye at our things. That's good. Review and update the administrative procedures for reviewing and issuing easements and reviewing compensation for easements. I really want to take a moment to thank, as I know you do, the committee members for their service, the Rules Advisory Committee, otherwise known as the RAC, that Ann Friend attends quite frequently. There's a diverse group of folks that attended that RAC, and it met 4 times over a period of 4 months. And they assisted the department greatly in helping us prepare a draft rule for public comment. The department held 3 public hearings on the proposed rules, Ontario, Bend, and Salem, all this year. The department recommends that the Land Board adopt the proposed changes to the administrative rules for granting easements on trust land and rules for granting easements on non-trust land.
Thank you, Director Walker. I also want to thank the department for their hard work on this, along with the Rules Advisory Committee, which is fairly extensive, and I just want to say thank you to the folks that spent their time and energy on the RAC. So, thank you. We won't charge you for the phone ring either.
I'm not sure who that was. You know, I had a rule that phones that rang or computers that made noise, you have to make contributions to the Common School Fund. Whose phone was that?
I don't think we can do that here. I think that might be a conflict of interest. So, Treasurer Reed.
Madam Chair, I want to associate myself with your comments about the complexity and comprehensiveness of that committee, and I appreciate their work as well. I move that we approve the staff recommendation and the proposed changes to the rules for granting easements.
Treasurer Reed moves the staff recommendation and approval of the rules prepared by the Rules Advisory Committee. Any further discussion? Secretary Richardson, any comments? Thank you. Any objection to the motion? Hearing and seeing none, so ordered. Thank you. Great work, you guys. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. My staff deserves a lot of credit for that, as you well pointed out. Item 5, we're going to scoot right along. This is a Coos County filled land sale. This was interesting. We're asking the State Land Board to authorize the department to sell 0.4 acres of state-owned filled land in Appendix A in a direct land sale. In 1988, the department requested State Land Board approval for the filling and sale of 0.4 acres of submerged state-owned land in Coos County. Appendix B. The proposed sale was to Crescent City Marine Ways and Dry Dock, Inc. for lands that extended beyond the company's deeded tideland ownership. This request to create and sell new lands was approved under Removal Fill Permit 3341 by the Land Board on July 29, 1988. So that should have been the end of it. Unfortunately, in 2016, the waterway lease held by Sauce Brothers adjacent to their upland riparian ownership was due for renewal, which included the lands created under the 1988 Removal Fill Permit. As a result of the renewal process, department staff discovered, these filled lands were never in fact purchased by Crescent City Marine Ways and Dry Dock. The applicant, Sauce Brothers, was also unable to produce a record of conveyance of the filled lands. So, the department informed the applicant that the lands either needed to be purchased or leased under a special use lease. In January 2016, Sauce Brothers submitted an application for purchase of these filled lands with a survey of the associated area per the department's request. And through our due diligence, the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians contacted the department with some concerns. The department's archaeologist worked with the tribes to clear up some misunderstandings on where the filled parcel was located and when the parcel had been filled. The tribes then withdrew any concerns they had with the land sale, and no other comments were received. Per the filled land rules, the value of the land is $3,515. Therefore, the department recommends that the State Land Board authorize the direct sale of the 0.4 acres of state-owned filled land in Coos County to the adjacent riparian landowner for $3,515.
Thank you. Treasurer Reed.
Madam Chair, I move approval of the recommendation and authorization of the direct sale of 4/10 of an acre in Coos County.
Treasurer Reed has moved that we approve the staff recommendation to authorize the direct sale of 0.4 acres of state-owned filled land in Coos County to the adjacent riparian landowner. Any further discussion? Any objection to the motion?
No.
Thank you. Hearing and seeing none, so ordered.
All right, we'll move along to item 6. Agenda item 6 is to clarify the Callan report and the conversation at the Land Board in June 14, 2018. At the June 14, 2018 Land Board meeting, senior investment staff from the Oregon State Treasurer's Office and Callan Consultants presented the annual Common School Fund Distribution Report. The report recommended that the maximum distribution be updated to 3.5%. After the board approved this recommendation, questions were raised by stakeholders if this distribution amount included the Senate Bill 1566 amount. Senate Bill 1566, as you know, came out of the 2018 session. Considering, or the 2017 session. Whoops.
No, it was 2018.
It was 2018. Thank you. I was right the first time. Considering the confusion, you see I have it already, department staff reached out to Callan to clarify this issue. Attached is the letter from Janet Becker-Wold, Senior Vice President and Manager for Callan. This memo clearly indicates that the 3.5% does not include the Senate Bill 1566 amount. And as we move along here today under this agenda item, I'll be able to talk about what that distribution will be for 2019. We have also put some things on our website, some one-pagers for people to understand how those distributions are made. But we will also have a more extensive report that we will post later today or tomorrow. So we have this motion before the treasurer, since it was appropriate that it was his group of folks that came in and we got lost in the conversation. So we have that, and then once you make that motion and approve it, then I'll move on to a couple other items under that agenda item.
Great, thank you. Treasurer Reed.
Madam Chair, in an attempt to clarify what we had talked about before, I move that the land board set the maximum distribution rate of 3.5% for the common school fund distribution, and to be clear, that would not include the Senate Bill 1566 distribution to PERS.
Thank you. Any discussion, any questions, Secretary Richardson?
No questions?
Thank you. Any objections to the motion? Hearing and seeing none, the motion passes. Thank you for your
Great.
work on this.
So I just wanted to alert everyone to the 2019 distribution. Our department, through the good work of Lee Hollinger and Star Thompson, have done a great job of putting together a notebook that you all received during your briefings, and we'll put this information up on our website. It's a roadmap to how we get to the decisions that we make regarding the distributions, because everyone always has questions about it. And as Lee said, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, I wouldn't be able to tell you how we did it. So they created this notebook, so if any of us gets hit by a bus, someone's going to know how we made this decision. So
We of course are hoping that no one gets hit by a
oh,
bus tomorrow.
absolutely. So the first part of the executive summary in this report will point to the distribution levels for fiscal year 2019. So I will state those on the record. The Department of Education will be receiving $60,862,987. Is that correct? Good, I got it right. Those will be made in two distributions on the 20th, which is just Thursday, I believe. Thursday, almost right before Christmas. There'll be a 30.4 million approximately distribution, and then again on June 20 of 2019, there will be a similar distribution of 30.4 million. The PERS Senate Bill 1566 funding will be $11,539,471, and that will be distributed on January 10th, 2019, for total fiscal year 2019 Common School Fund distributions of $72,402,458. Now let me tell you also in this notebook that will be on our website is the specific sheet that will tell you how the Senate Bill 1566 monies were calculated. It's step by step. There's total transparency in how that is done, and gets us down to that approximately $11 million number. I have to point out, I hate to point it out, but Madam Chair and members of the board, if we had not had the global derelict vessel problem, we would have been adding another $9 million to that distribution. That vessel removal project took about $12 million of common school money, and it's quite distressing. So this department is working on ways to avoid things like global in the future. And so I apologize that the outflow is not as high as we'd like, but it's still pretty good.
Director Walker, if I can
Yes.
just interrupt you here for just a minute. I just want to clarify the purpose of the Senate Bill 1566 legislation, and that did become law during the February 2018 session, and the goal of this was to provide funding for state school districts, their unfunded liability fund, per the legislation, and the goal was to stabilize employer rates for our school districts. So it was one of the tools that we had to help out our school districts, and I think you will see other distributions coming from other sources as time goes on, not necessarily through this board, but other sources as well. So thank you.
And thank you. I'm sure the public appreciates that clarification. The other item under agenda item 6 that I slipped in at the last minute because I'm very proud of it, and we had a meeting this Monday with our audit firm, and we have this great financial report for you at your table. and it also will be on our website. As I mentioned, we recently had our annual audit performed by Marina and Company out of West Lynn, though I think Tanya says they're moving to Tualatin soon. Ms. Tanya Moffett, a CPA and partner in the firm, is here today should you have any questions. Because the secretary sits on the land board, we must hire an outside auditor for the financial review of the Common School Fund. The department has contracted with Marina and Company since 2013 to perform that work, and they've done excellent work, though they keep telling me that it's not their work, it's our work. So I want our staff to take credit for that. Oregon expects state agencies to be held to the highest standards for financial practices during audits. I'm proud to say that Marina and Company's audit of financial statements of the Common School Fund found the Department of State Lands management of the fund meets these high standards. No changes or corrections to the department's financial procedures, practices, or controls are needed. As Ms. Moffett told me yesterday, it takes a lot of work on a daily basis to have a financial statement that looks like this, meaning it looks really good. So I'd like to recognize the work of our finance team, particularly Lee Hollinger and Star Thompson, in achieving this outcome. And Lee, you're here. Star is in the office, but raise your hand so they know who you are. Thank you. And he's been a great hire. We hired him this year, and I can't thank him enough for the work that he does.
Director Walker, I'd just also like to add, Lee, I know that you and Star were integral to preparing this notebook. I just found the information extremely helpful and very useful, and thank you for your time and energy.
Thank you.
And you are not getting hit by a bus. All right, so that didn't require any motion. I just wanted to bring that up and let you know where we're at. So we will move along.
Hang on just a minute. I will see if the secretary has any questions or comments.
Sorry.
Secretary Richardson, any comments?
No, there's thorough, Vicky's explanation very thorough.
Great, thank you. Treasurer Reed, any comments? Great. Okay.
And thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciated sharing that with you last Friday. Okay, now we move to agenda item 7, where we have a lot of folks here today. At the Land Board's direction, the department has been continuing work on the Elliott State Forest Public Ownership Project, which seeks a public option for the forest that will keep the forest publicly owned, decouple the forest from the Common School Fund, compensating the school fund for the forest, and releasing the forest from its obligation to generate revenue for schools, and continue habitat conservation planning to protect species and allow for harvest. Today's updates touch on all of those outcomes. We've added an update on the habitat conservation plan development to this item, followed by presentations from potential public owners who have submitted a letter of interest, a declaration regarding the $100 million in bonding approved by the 2017 legislature, a summary of comments on the Oregon Consensus Decoupling Report, and a request for direction regarding next steps for public engagement. We will get to all those things in the course of this conversation today. In a moment, after we hear some opening comments from the Land Board, I'd like to invite Troy Ramig from ICF Inc. to come up to the table. Mr. Ramig is a principal at ICF and lead on development of the Habitat Conservation Plan, and so far they are just doing phenomenal work. Development of an HCP is a major element of the public ownership project and a topic that is prominent for potential public owners who have all talked to me about the HCP, as well as in the conversation about decoupling. Having context on the Habitat Conservation Plan status and next steps before hearing the other updates will be particularly helpful. So at this time, I will stop talking and see if the Land Board has any comments they'd like to make, and then I'll invite Mr. Ramig up.
Thank you, Director Walker. I'll just be brief. From my perspective, my goal in this process are to continue to narrow and focus our options for the future and particularly for the Elliott Forest. There are a couple of principles that I have in mind. Number one, that we would continue with some type of public ownership. Number two, that we would keep a commitment to the habitat conservation plan. I think it's technically a multi-species habitat conservation plan. And that third, we would continue our efforts to decouple the revenue from the forest from the common school fund, while of course making the common school fund whole. So there's where I'm going to be focused, and with that I'm happy to turn it over to Treasurer Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you offered a good summary of my initial thoughts too. I imagine I'm going to have some comments as we go through, but I think that's fine for right now. Thank you.
Secretary Richardson, any comments?
Only the following 3 points. Most important, DSL needs to move fast on the HCP. Second, we need to remember that our legal duty is to manage the forest for education purposes and for funding education. And third, we should not accept any plan that relies on more general funding, on general fund bonds. The forest has cost too much on the taxpayers already.
Thank you, Secretary Richardson. Director Walker.
All right, thank you. Troy, could you join me? And introduce yourself again.
Sure. Thank you, Governor, members of the board. Thank you for having me. My name is Troy Ramick with ICF. I am the project manager for the technical team that is assisting Department of State Lands in the preparation of the Habitat Conservation Plan for the Elliott State Forest. I thought it would be useful, we thought it would be useful today as the conversation unfolds around public future ownership and the decoupling process to just give you an update on where we are in the HCP planning process, and then I have a few thoughts about how both ownership and decoupling might influence that going forward that I think will be useful. So a quick update on the planning process for the HCP. We have been at it for a few months now, working closely with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, really sort of laying the baseline at this point in time. So I think the important elements of the HCP that have come together so far are the plan area, obviously Elliott State Forest, but specifically the common school funds inside of the boundary of the state forest. The species, Governor Brown is right, it is a multi-species plan, so we're including 3 species, northern spotted owl, marbled murrelet, and Oregon coast coho in the plan, so it's a 3-species plan. And we have settled on the covered activities that will be considered as part of the planning process. That's, of course, timber harvest, stand management activities, road construction and maintenance, and then the conservation activities that are needed to actually implement the HCP over time. So that's what's been going on so far. That has resulted in the first 3 chapters of what will be about a 10-chapter habitat conservation plan. Those are sort of the introduction, regulatory framework, the environmental setting, which is very much the baseline situation out there, and the covered activities chapter. And as I mentioned, we've been working with the federal and state wildlife agencies to make sure that we're using the best available science as we move into this process. And I feel good about where we are right now. We are at a pivotal stage in the HCP planning process where we're turning our attention away from sort of the baseline data collection towards what we call the effects analysis and the conservation strategy. And that really is just thinking about how the covered activities may impact the covered species over time. Once we quantify that, we then come up with a conservation strategy that's designed to offset those potential effects. So that's where we are in the process right now, and that actually leads me into a couple of comments about future ownership and the decoupling process, because they are relevant in this in the stage, the planning stage that we're in right now. And that is when we think about who may own and operate on the forest in the future, and we've been having conversations with the regulatory agencies about this recently. It's important to note that when we go through developing the habitat conservation plan and when the agencies go through the process of determining whether or not the plan meets their issuance criteria, so they can actually issue the incidental take permits, they have to go through what is termed sort of a term of art, a practicability analysis. There's sometimes a notion that HCPs are done and they actually reduce economic viability of a project, but in reality, by law, they have to be practicable, and that is they have to be both technically feasible and economically viable. So we always have our eyes on that as we're developing the conservation strategy, that economic viability is a really important part of that. It's also important when the agencies are reviewing the application and the HCP that they understand what practicability means. And so as it relates to future ownership, just know that what may be practicable for one owner may be slightly different than what is for another owner. And so the economic needs of the future owner will need to be known before we can really complete the HCP and get the permit. So that's worth noting. The second piece of that is we need to develop, it's required that we develop funding assurances, so we have to demonstrate how the HCP is going to be paid for over time. And obviously that may differ depending on who the future owner is, and so having better information about the future owner will help us develop those funding assurances and help the regulatory agencies make their findings related to funding assurances. And then finally, I would just, a couple thoughts about the decoupling process, and that is everything I mentioned related to practicability and economic viability. Obviously, depending on how the decoupling process plays out, that's going to transform the economic needs of the forest over time. So again, just having a better understanding of how that may play out on the forest and change the economics of revenue generation on the forest will be useful and necessary as we develop the habitat conservation plan. So I do appreciate the words of Secretary Richardson that we need to work on this very quickly and develop an HCP fast. I think at this point in time, we also need to just be cognizant of the moving pieces in front of us and make sure that we also do it thoughtfully so that we don't have to redo anything later in time. So that's where I would leave it. I think that's an update. I do feel like we are at a good place in the development of the planning effort, and it's been a really great partnership between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and of course Department of State Lands has been great leaders in that. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Hearing and seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Troy. They were here last Friday for a technical meeting at the same time as our Environmental Justice Task Force meeting. So it was a busy day here at the Land Board room. So we now will start to hear from folks who have submitted letters of interest to me by December 5th. And that will be Oregon State University, followed by Coos County and Douglas County, Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians, the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, Liz Dent with the Oregon Department of Forestry, and Wes Ream and Jim Schaller of the Raw Foundation. So we will kick this off with Oregon State, and I will move away so you can all come up here. And Ed, I haven't seen you in so long. I'm sorry, I just have to take a moment.
Okay.
How are you? Yes, so come on up. That doesn't mean anything about how we feel about what who's taking over the Elliott.
Madam Chair,
Treasurer Reed.
I'd like to just say something while they're getting settled, and
Please.
really to thank the Dean and the President for being here. Really, I especially want to thank you for the conversation we started back in 2017. I recall you expressing anxiety about being involved in the conversation about the Elliott, and joking, although I know it wasn't really a joke, that your priority was securing a building in Bend not a forest in Southern Oregon. But I am nevertheless grateful that you've continued to be a partner with us in having this conversation, and I know you've really, I think at least, taken seriously the question about whether there is a role for the university in the Elliott's future. I know you've devoted resources and time to that, and I really want to thank you. Looking forward to hearing your conclusions, your progress, and at the risk of stepping on your toes just a little bit, I know that there is not, much as we wish there were, a magic OSU checkbook with $120 million in it. But I am convinced that if there's anyone who has a compelling vision for the future of this forest, it's very likely OSU. So thank you for all that you've done so far, and certainly looking forward to what you have to update us on.
Treasury, and besides, I think they did get the building for the Cascade campus that they wanted, so.
They did, Governor. I was thinking of the early conversation
Yes.
before that was clear.
Now we need the magic fund.
All right, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Anthony Davis. I have the honor of serving as interim dean of the top-ranked College of Forestry in North America at Oregon State University. And it's an opportunity right now to share our vision with you. And based on the due diligence that we performed that we promised in the 2017 MOU, we have identified that there are a number of opportunities out there that the board could consider to achieve public ownership. And there's one option that we're interested in pursuing, and that's working with the board and the department and stakeholders to establish the Elliott State Research Forest. And this aligns well with our land grant institution status, as well as our interpretation of the assumptions that you've clearly articulated, and our need to provide transformative teaching, research, and service for Oregonians. And to frame this, we have to recognize that we are in a climate crisis now. And we have to be doing everything in our power to inform forest conservation and management into the future. From mitigating the effects of devastating fires to protecting our water resources, our forests are worthy of the dedication of our brightest minds, and they need continuing scientific discovery to sustain our forest ecosystems and our forest economies. And our vision for the Elliott State Research Forest recognizes the importance of forests to Oregon's culture, ecosystems, and economy. We envision this being a source of critical information that we use to inform conservation management now and as we work through the ongoing changes driven by our climate. Developing new knowledge and demonstrating the applicability towards conservation and stewardship objectives would benefit not just local resource managers, but through meaningful partnerships would serve as a resource to preserve traditional ecological knowledge, to enhance our ability to provide in balance multiple values such as recreation, wildlife habitat, and timber from our working landscapes that would recognize and reflect contemporary societal goals. And it could serve as a baseline for seeking a pathway forward as we have to find balance between threats to our forest health, conservation of our critical ecosystems, conservation of at-risk species, and working to restart our lagging rural economies. Such a forest would allow for research at a temporal and spatial scale that would be unique to the world. And it would be capable of providing science-based management guidance addressing some of our greatest challenges now, 25, 50, and even 100 years into the future, a benefit for all Oregonians now and moving forward. We've spent considerable time and resources examining the potential for this vision, and we're confident that we could establish a framework that addresses the public values that the board has stated, that works to achieve the financial objectives while not basing debt service as a director of capacity for future harvest, for future research, and making sure that we're consistent with a research mission of a land-grant university. We believe an Elliott State Research Forest is a vision worth pursuing, but there is a lot of work to be done with stakeholders, with tribal governments, with potential funding partners, federal listing agencies, and the department This extensive list would take much of 2019 before we could know important details with any precision. And that must be done before we could enter into meaningful financial discussions. Should this vision be something that you find interesting, our college is interested in working with the board to advance it.
Thank you, Governor, members of the board. Economists are trained, like most academics, to learn to take 2 hours to make a point. So let me try to stick to my prepared remarks. I would want to echo what...
Yeah, we're only going to give you 2 minutes,
I
so.
know. I heard 5 at the max.
Okay.
I really want to echo what Anthony said. We all know that certainly the health and well-being of our forests, as is the case with California and many other parts of the world, is a matter at great risk. And we need experts to be involved from all levels of society to get a workable plan going forward. We have a tremendous asset in the sense that, as Anthony said, your College of Forestry at Oregon State University has been ranked as the #2 forestry program in the world. So we have incredible talent to work on the issues that are facing us today. And I think in that sense, Oregon is uniquely positioned with access to the Elliott Forest to provide the world, not just Oregon, but really the world, with concrete plans to optimally balance habitat protection, recreational use, and timber production. We are prepared to continue a role in this effort for the university, if that is what the Land Board desires of us. As the state's land-grant university, our expertise is in research and forest management. I cannot foresee circumstances under which the university could purchase the forest outright, but we are interested in what can be accomplished in partnership with the state. We believe that with the right coalition, a package of revenue sources could be assembled to enable the state to decouple the forest from the Common School Fund while holding the fund harmless. Under the currently proposed budget, OSU faces a funding challenge of budget reductions of perhaps $20 million in operating funds for the next biennium. We cannot assume levels of debt service driven by forest harvesting that cannot be sustained or add more controversy to the university. While we remain very interested in moving forward, we need important information before the State Land Board and the university can commit to a long-term financial transaction that provides certainty to the Common School Fund and to those who cherish the Elliott Forest. With that in mind, we're ready to move forward if several conditions can be realized. First, the board is committed to a vision of an Elliott research forest that includes active management of the forest in concert with the public values you've already identified. We can agree to an aggressive work plan with the department to nail down the details to accomplish this with financial terms that are acceptable for the Common School Fund and for the university. The relevant parties make progress on a draft of the Habitat Conservation Plan, and we've already heard some testimony that that's moving forward, in order to bring management constraints and other key details into focus to see how the pieces are going to fit together. And then that the department dedicates resources to complete the necessary analyses to move forward, hopefully by December of next year, in a manner that fully engages interested and concerned stakeholders in a meaningful way. And I'll stop my comments there. We're both happy to respond to any questions or observations you may have.
Thank you. Secretary Richardson, any comments or questions?
No,
Treasurer Reed?
thank you.
Thank you both again for your testimony. I wonder, recognizing the time constraints we are under, I was particularly interested in the description you gave around the role that a research forest could play in dealing with climate change. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit, please?
Certainly. The key issue when you think of an 80,000 acre forest is scale and the ability to look not just at taking a 20-acre experiment and multiplying it to get it at an 80,000 acre size, but really looking at what are the questions that we have not even been able to address because we haven't had a suitable platform to bring those into the realm of research. Those questions, landscape adaptation, whether it's for management or for species conservation, we see these in our higher elevation and our drier lands more soon sometimes than in our wetter coastal forests. But we also know a reduction in precipitation in southwestern Oregon could have devastating effects on habitat and management. So identifying ways where we could be looking at the short, mid, and long-term impacts of such changes and then strategies we could use to mitigate those effects wouldn't be something I would do, but we have the right team of researchers and the right partner network to start to ask those questions so that we're not caught unprepared 5, 10, 50 years from now.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was intrigued, you mentioned the tribes, and I'm curious if you, not you personally, but the Royal you, have thought about how you might partner with Oregon's tribes on this particular project moving forward.
We have, and one of the, you mentioned earlier sort of that funneling approach with this process. So should this vision that we presented to the board be something you wish us to pursue further, we would be going around the state and sitting down and talking with people to discuss what are the critical needs. This shouldn't be a question that's addressed by one person in an office on the Corvallis campus. This is a statewide decision because of the magnitude of impacts it has. So we would involve through consultation and through discussion, looking for an opportunity perhaps to blend some traditional ecological knowledge with Western science and see if there are key landmark type studies we could begin with. But also the education and the service components, the teaching and service components of Oregon State University, we have a role to make sure that people in those communities, people in communities around Oregon are well equipped to steward natural resources into the future. So involving in repeated conversations is really where we would go, and helping identify what's our role and what's that shared role of those meaningful partnerships.
Thank you. And then you mentioned in your testimony that you're interested in preserving traditional ecological knowledge. Could you talk about how you might accomplish that?
From my own experience as a researcher and as a teacher, one of the things we often do is we in academia, we write a proposal, we submit it, we get it funded, and then we're told, oh, you need broader measures, or you need to bring other partners in. And we put together a loose coalition of support. Again, thinking about the scale of the Elliott State Forest, that presents an opportunity, instead of everyone being an add-on, to flip that conversation. We're talking about a century-long program of research, and we're talking about a land base that's supported life and livelihoods for millennia. So how do we move some of our pressing Western scientific-based questions from research to have a meaningful tribal or traditional ecological knowledge component at the very beginning? So we know these lands have been used for a very long time for hunting, for gathering, for cultural purposes, for prairies, for building, for supporting life and livelihoods. How do we engage appropriately to make sure those values are considered as we design research questions? With that, you will end up with a structure that celebrates and recognizes and preserves those values far more likely than if we put forward, here are the big 10 research questions for Oregon forests now and into the future. Oh, by the way, we need an 11th question. That is not a recognition of the scale of opportunity that comes with the Elliott State Forest.
Thank you. Secretary Richardson, any other comments, questions?
No comments on.
All right. Thank you both very much. We appreciate it.
Governor, if I can, just to put maybe a finer point on what we're suggesting here, we have a world-class forestry program, research faculty. If anyone knows how to manage a forest, if anyone knows how to balance managing the forest for productive use, but also for habitat conservation, recreational uses, you have at your call a group of experts who are literally unmatched, who will help make that happen. The question is, do you want to stop there, or do you want to go further? Do you want, or do you aspire for Oregon, the nation, and the world to have a leading research capability that helps all of us understand around this globe how to manage forest resources going forward? What kind of research needs to be done at a scale at which there are differences in slope, riparian areas, ground conditions, soil content, of a size and scope that really has never been available before. We have people who can really look into that, and hopefully Oregon can be a leader for the world.
Well, I know exactly where I'm headed, and I really appreciate your question, and I look forward to having the budget conversation with you at another time, but rest assured that these will be considered separately. So thank you. Appreciate you taking your time and energy, and glad to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Our next presenter would be John Sweet with Coos County. Commissioner John Sweet.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm John Sweet, Coos County Commissioner. My prepared script indicates that Melissa Cribbins, fellow commissioner, would be here with me, but due to the weather and the possible road conditions, we chose to leave her home. That proved to be unnecessary. The ODOT's doing a fantastic job, and I've never seen 38 in better condition than it now is.
Great.
The Elliott, most of which lies within Coos County, is very important to the county and its citizens. It holds cultural, recreational, environmental, and economic importance to us. We believe that Coos County, with the assistance of partners, is uniquely positioned to manage the forest in a way that will balance the interests named above. If you think OSU expressed or had some anxiety over the possibility of acquiring the Elliott, you can only imagine what we at Coos County must feel. I do not think it is a surprise to any of you that ownership of the forest will be a heavy lift for Coos County. Ours is a small county, I think well managed, and run on a tight budget. The county has little tolerance for risk and does not have resources to subsidize the forest. In other words, we must be able to harvest the forest at a level adequate to fully fund its management and to service debt necessary to acquire the same. We believe this can be done in such a way that I beg your pardon, we believe this can be done in such a way that cultural, recreational, and environmental interests are protected. Our own county forest of 15,000 acres is managed by the county's forestry department. It is held open to the public for activities such as mountain biking, hiking, mushroom picking, bird watching, hunting, target practice, and motorbiking. We harvest the forest on a sustained yield basis, contributing significant dollars to the county budget. We know that from our own experience that a forest can be managed for multiple uses. We anticipate working with one of the region's tribes to manage the Elliott. This would not only assure a tribe of revenue from the Elliott, but would also provide the county with the expertise the tribes have in managing extended harvest rotations versus the shorter, more industrial-like rotations on which our county forest is managed. We have had conversations with Douglas County about joint ownership of the Elliott. This would reduce the amount of debt either of the counties would incur on their own. The two counties work well together, sharing interests in both the O&C and the Coos Bay Wagon Road lands. Western Douglas County in particular is tied to Coos County for much of its commerce and medical services. Coos County also works closely with the Coos Watershed Association on stream enhancement and fish passage issues. Coos Watershed has a strong presence in the Elliott and a vigorous work plan in place for those lands. We have reached out to the watershed to find ways to enhance their work in the Elliott and hope that finances would allow us to include them in our management plan. Coos County does not yet know enough about the Elliott Forest age class distribution, riparian acreage, steep slope and cultural set-asides, and the pending habitat conservation plan to have a definitive management proposal for the forest. However, as a preliminary guide to our thinking, we offer the following on the Elliott's approximately 80,000 acres of common school fund lands. 20,000 acres, about a quarter of the land, would be permanently reserved from harvest to provide riparian, steep slope, cultural, and old growth set-asides. The remaining 60,000 acres would be harvested on a 100 to 120 year rotation in an effort to minimize the harvest footprint. This would provide for 500 to 600 acres of harvest each year, resulting in no more than 0.75% annual harvest of the on the 80,000 acres. This annual harvest would be distributed among the numerous drainages in the forest to minimize impact. Mathematically, this harvest plan would result in 25% of the Elliott never being harvested and 45 to 50% of the forest in age classes of 80 years of age and older. The other 50 to 55% of the land would be in various age classes under 80 years of age, offering a broad range of habitats for species, including deer, elk, songbirds, grouse, rapiers, and small woodland animals. Using 550 acres as the annual harvest acreage with a stocking of 50,000 board feet per acre and a stumpage price of $400 per thousand would provide the forest with estimated annual harvest of 27.5 million board feet of timber and annual gross revenues of $11 million. Debt service on the $120,800,000 purchase price would approximate $9 million a year, leaving $2 million to cover management costs and revenue to the purchaser. These numbers, of course, could change depending on interest rates and the duration of bonded debt and indebtedness. The county anticipates issuing bonds to cover the $120,800,000 purchase price. Bringing in partners would reduce the amount of money Coos County would need to borrow, but it is anticipated that partners would also have to borrow money. And so in the end, the math does not change. Other financing possibilities might be pre-selling harvest rights to the harvestable acreage to a local wood products firm, or signing a note providing for annual principal and interest payments to the Common School Fund. Those questions are largely up to you. As with our current 15,000 acre county forest, the entire 80,000 acres of the Elliott would be kept open to the public except for fire closures and safety issues relating to harvest activities. We have a county parks department, and that gives us the potential to provide for organized camping facilities on the property. We would welcome having Oregon State's College of Forestry using the Elliott as a laboratory for studying the implications of extended harvest cycles. We appreciate the opportunity to explore purchasing the Elliott. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Commissioner Sweet, and thank you for driving up. I know it's a long, hard haul, so we appreciate you being here. I'm curious if you did any sort of job analysis. I know obviously that harvesting at the levels that you are suggesting under your proposal would continue to provide product for the local mills, but I'm curious if you did any type of job analysis and have a sense of that.
No, Governor, we have not.
Okay. Treasurer Reed, any questions or comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. And thank you, Commissioner, for making your way up here and sharing your thoughts. Appreciate particularly the specificity you gave us in terms of the numbers and how your plan would rely on bonds. That's something we do in our office. I'm curious what kind of sensitivity analysis you might have done in terms of, you mentioned duration, you mentioned some of those other variables. What's your sense of how the market would react to that?
You know, I don't know.
Okay.
Ours was a very cursory investigation. I have annual repayment programs for various interest rate scenarios and various long term debt term, but I haven't gone into that.
I appreciate that.
I don't know that we as a county have that capacity.
I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just think about the various factors that could change that, some of which we know about and many of which we don't. That's what makes me think about that. So I appreciate the question. And
I can tell you the people we talked to thought somewhere between 4 and 5% bonding and bond could be had, and they suggested various terms of 20, 25, and 30 years. So they haven't said no yet.
Okay, thank you.
Secretary Richardson, any questions or comments for Commissioner Sweet?
The presentation was clear.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
I actually have one more quick question. I'm curious, in your proposal, would you see a role for any type of partnership with the OSU forestry program?
Oh, absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
I think I mentioned that at the very end, that we would welcome that. And
Okay.
I think that would be a fascinating thing to be able to do an acreage of this size and to have the benefit of the research and that Oregon State can do. I'm a bit prejudiced. I graduated from the Oregon State School of Forestry, so
Go Beavs,
don't go
okay.
giving this to Yale or anyone else like
All
that.
right. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
coming up and joining us. We really appreciate your time and energy.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now we'll call up Commissioner Chris Boyce with Douglas County, the neighbor of Coos County.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Land Board. I think it may be appropriate in the interest of saving your time, mine, and everyone else's here to just say ditto. Yeah, we obviously have a very close relationship with Coos County, and everyone's aware that we share the entirety of the Elliott between our two counties and share very similar interests. We've not invested a whole bunch of time and limited resource that we have in preparing a formal proposal. We have been watching from the very beginning when the State Land Board started talking about decoupling the Elliott from the Common School Fund, and have been very interested. And as you know, we were very supportive of the original proposal and still remain so. We feel like there's an opportunity for Douglas County to be involved. We literally have all of the same concerns as Coos County and all the same limited resources as they do. There's no reason to go back through all of that. We have potential partners, although we've not formed any formal partnerships or had really any formal conversations, but I'm also very interested in an idea that hasn't been mentioned yet. As you know, we are dependent upon our federal partners for management of the O&C land, and I liked the comment that was made by the folks from Oregon State about the ability to scale with the Elliott. And I think that potentially there's an opportunity to use the Elliott as a pilot project for management of the O&C without the BLM having to necessarily go through the process to rewrite the resource management plan. And the help of Oregon State in doing that, I think, is intriguing. But beyond that, I think I'll save all the rest of the points as they've already been made and just leave an opportunity for you guys to ask whatever questions you may have.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyce. Treasurer Reed.
I think I have the same question, and therefore, if this commissioner has also said ditto, probably the same answer. So we can continue the trend of saving time. Yeah.
Great. Secretary Richardson, any questions or comments?
Well, it would be a natural fit for OSU and the counties to work together. So, and the tribes as well. So, I would hope that the opportunities would present themselves.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner Boyce. We appreciate you traveling as well. And
Oh, you're welcome.
I know we're whining a little bit about the rain, but personally, in terms of the drought numbers, I think the more rain we can get right now, the
We'll take
better.
it.
So I know you will. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now I'm honored to call up, we have two sovereign tribal nations with us here today. The first one to speak will be the Cow Creek, and I believe Anthony Broadman and Tim Bredenberg.
Good morning, Governor Brown, Secretary of State Richardson, Treasurer Reed. I have Tim Bredenberg with me, the Director of Forest Management for the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians. My name is Anthony Broadman. I'm from Bend. I'm a partner with the Galanda Broadman Law Firm. I'm here representing my client, the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians. My comments on behalf of the tribe will be brief. As you all are familiar with the materials, the tribe has presented before this board on several occasions in the last couple of years. You also have the tribe's letter in support or in response to the state's call for interest that speaks to the position of the Cow Creek tribe. As the public records show and the letter that we sent conveys, the tribe, along with the confederated tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, have been active in the discussions about the future of the Elliott State Forest for years. The state has defined the challenge of fulfilling its statutory obligation to maximize revenue for the Common School Fund through the harvest of timber from this public forest. The Cow Creek spent significant time and resources attempting to develop a solution that would allow the forest to remain in public ownership, i.e. the tribes, and be managed consistently with the tribe's long-standing, indeed millennially history of sustainable forest management practices. Since presenting before you a year ago, the Cow Creek tribe's commitment to restoring its land base that it was taken from all of Oregon's native people has not changed, and the Elliott is part of that base. The proposal as presented by the state for the acquisition from a public owner does not open the door any further for tribal ownership than the one presented 2 years ago, practically. The same challenges exist. Tribes simply don't have the kind of capital without some sort of funding partner to single-handedly purchase the Elliott Forest. So our purpose in addressing the board today is twofold. First, the tribe wants to correct a false narrative that the tribe was simply serving as a front to a private timber company. Any suggestion of that was incorrect, and it was insulting to the tribe whose proposed partner had consistent values of sustainable forest practices and had the capital at the time necessary to help support the purchase and provide a path for increased ownership for the tribe over time. As our letter clearly states, the tribe, like the other federally recognized tribes, is not an interest group. The tribes are sovereign people, sovereign governments, and entitled to be treated as sovereigns in all policy conversations with the state of Oregon. Second, we want to educate everybody who's paying attention to this issue, the board, the people of Oregon, those listening today, that sustainable forest practices are inherent in Cow Creek tribal culture. The lands we are discussing today and throughout Oregon would not be in the condition they are today, in the preserved condition they are today, if history showed anything different. And the Cow Creek also has its own Department of Natural Resources, its own forest management resources, its own forestry staff that is constantly developing new approaches to environmentally and culturally sensitive forest management, practices that allow for economic development opportunities for the tribe while preserving its natural assets for generations to come. The public knows very little about this because it is not in the tribe's way to boast about its achievements or promote itself through advertising its accomplishments. But these 2 points are important because while the access to capital has not changed, and under the current proposal, tribal ownership does not appear feasible, the tribe can and frankly should be a resource for the state in the area of forest management. There's also a tremendous opportunity for the tribe and state to work together in its government-to-government capacity in the future to advance mutually attainable goals. For the state to maximize revenue through sustainable timber harvest, and the tribe to restore this tribe and other tribes to restore their land bases over time. In closing, the Cow Creek tribe is not here today to present a new proposal to acquire the Elliott. We're expressing interest. The tribe already did submit a proposal with the only means available to them, and that solution was rejected. So Cow Creek is here today because it is a sovereign government with historical and cultural ties to the land that is now called Oregon, and has an uncompromising record on sustainable forest practices and management that should never be overlooked. The tribe is disappointed about the past, but it's here to look forward, and it hopes that the lessons learned from the previous proposals and that experience on the Elliott can lead to good things going forward for both the state of Oregon and the tribes across Oregon who resided on and cared for our lands as Oregon's first people. On behalf of the tribe, I want to thank you all for your time and for looking at this issue so seriously. The tribe, through me, is not going to take any questions from you today or offer additional comments, but I can assure you that the tribe and we want to remain a resource for you as you deliberate this and other forest management decisions to come. So thank you.
Thank you both very much. We appreciate your time and energy, and please give our regards to the chair.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'd like to call up our second sovereign nation here today, the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians. Chief Brainerd, you brought Scott with you, I believe.
Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Governor and board members and staff. I'm honored to be here to speak. I didn't know I was going to, but I'm here.
Great.
And first of all, I want to apologize for the phone ringing, and I will submit to any punishment.
It happens to all of us. It happens to all of us.
The Elliott State Forest is real important to us. It's our traditional homeland. We had families that lived and raised families and lived in that part of the world for thousands of years. And it is of great importance to all our tribal people to be a part of it. Again, we want to be a resource like Cow Creek, that we want to be a part of anything that happens and help and make sure that we help manage it. Our policy for management has 7 generations, so we are committed to work together to make sure that the land is taken care of. I don't, other than that, and what other things I could say is it's really an honor to be able to come for you and speak for you.
Thank you so much.
And Scott is here to answer any questions or help us.
I did want to point out, Chief remarked that the Elliott lies within the Confederated Tribes Aboriginal homelands. In doing our research in preparation for our discussions this morning, our planning department reminded us that not only is there that ancient time immemorial connection that the tribe has with these forest lands, but in historical times, certain members of the tribes actually took homestead trust allotments within what is now the Elliott State Forest. So, the tribe and its members had maintained that connection to the Elliott as long as they possibly could, and they even managed to navigate the Indian allotment patent process and obtain a toehold into those lands. Of course, they were eventually dispossessed of those allotments, but that connection remains so strong within the tribe. And I think similar to Cow Creek, if only we had a spare $120 million dollars lying around, I think this would probably be about the tribe's top priority. If they had that kind of money, they'd love to acquire these lands outright and accomplish a decoupling consistent with the land board's preferences. You know, unfortunately, we don't have the cash in hand, but we want to be part of the discussion, and including being part of the financing discussion. I think tribes have opportunities by, you know, tax-exempt financing methods that may be in addition to what would probably be some sort of a syndicated financing arrangement, I would imagine. Also, just want to point out that, you know, we enjoyed the remarks of OSU and Douglas and Coos counties and the Cow Creek tribe. We could foresee us being partners with all of those entities. It seems to us to be a natural fit. And so we look forward to, we want a seat at the table, and we want to be a part of this solution for the Elliott.
Thank you. Secretary Richardson, do you have any questions or comments?
Only that I would love to see a plan that combines multiple of these units and comes up with a proposal.
Thank you. Treasurer Reed?
Madam Chair, I'd just say to both tribes, thank you for being here and continuing to be part of the conversation. I think your involvement and presence is really important, and as we go forward, we're going to continue to rely on you for your expertise and wisdom. We've got a lot of priorities to balance, but you both need to be part of that conversation. I'm glad you are.
Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you, Treasurer Reed. I think the only question I would have, and you don't need to answer it today, and I'm hoping I'm not putting you on the spot. I know that members of Cook Whale Tribe are not here, and could you talk or let my office know sort of, and maybe I can ask directly, the why they're not here and sort of the differences in the boundaries, and I don't have those obviously off the top of my head, but I'd love to hear your comments on that, Scott.
We're not sure why
Okay.
Cookwell isn't here, but we would imagine they'd love to be part of the discussion too.
All right. Thank you. Chief Brainerd, Scott, thank you very much for coming. We're going to have to get you guys a super shuttle from the South Coast so you can get up here in short order, because you're up here a lot, so that's a good thing. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, I will tell you, I keep Chief Brainerd busy also because he serves as a member on the Management Commission for the South Slough. So he's like me, we drive back and forth a lot. Okay, our next presenter, we have two more. Liz Dent with the Oregon Department of Forestry would like to speak to their letter.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicki, for the invitation to be here today. Governor Brown, members of the board, for the record, my name is Liz Dent, and I serve as the State Forest Division Chief with the Oregon Department of Forestry. I really do appreciate the opportunity to address the board today on behalf of Department of Forestry. In response to the solicitation for proposals, the department submitted a letter basically affirming our continued interest in staying engaged with the Land Board and DSL as you work towards a long-term solution for the Elliott State Forest. Our letter focused on a possible role for management and clearly did not have a proposal to purchase and own the Elliott. We're all aware of the series of financial, environmental, and social circumstances that have shaped the current challenge to own and manage the Elliott, and overcoming obstacles is nothing new when it comes to the Elliott. I think it's important to consider our current challenges in the context of those that were faced by the first state forester, Francis Elliott, and then Governor Oswald West. Their vision to establish the first state forest was realized in 1930 after 15 years that were spent assessing and finally identifying a viable land base, getting support and approval from the state legislature, and successfully negotiating several federal acts of Congress. The forest was established during the first year of the Great Depression, so there was no funding to cover the cost to manage the young second growth, fire regenerated forest with steep slopes and no roads. We face a different set of challenges now that weren't really present in 1930. And we've made this case before, but I think it bears repeating. ODF's sound management of the Elliott State Forest has created a biologically diverse, healthy, and productive public forest that is host to northern spotted owls, marbled murrelets, and Oregon coast coho, all of which, as we all know, are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. So there are understandably very high expectations and often competing priorities from the public on what the Elliott can and should provide for Oregonians. So ODF has a long history of managing the Elliott and the other 33,000 acres of the common school forest land, as this board is well familiar. In addition to managing the Department of Forestry's Board of Forestry lands, we're also actively engaged in supporting the Forest Service and ODFW in the management and restoration on some of their forest land. And I would argue that this speaks to and exemplifies ODF as a forestry leader in Oregon. We believe Oregon's forests, and in the we, this is the agency as a whole, so looking at forestry from the larger lens, that forests play a significant role in providing Oregonians a high quality of life, including jobs, abundant native fish and wildlife, clean water, ecosystem services, and other public benefits, including recreation. We believe healthy working forests support healthy rural communities, and sound forest stewardship can help achieve all those outcomes that I just listed. And importantly, we believe that forests should be managed in an adaptive context, utilizing research and monitoring to improve outcomes. These are core values for ODF, and they translate well to the management for the Elliott State Forest as managed as a public forest. So while we do not have a proposal on the table to purchase the Elliott, as the long-term manager of the forest and through decades of implementing the policy direction of the State Land Board, ODF maintains a genuine interest in the management of these lands. You've received and heard from a diversity of interested parties today, and each one of those brings an important voice to the table, all of which have really compelling visions, and it was really neat to sit here and listen to how that was delivered to you all this morning. So in light of that and the history that's brought us to this point today, clearly a viable solution to the complex challenges of owning and managing the Elliott requires collaboration. So we would look forward to working with the State Land Board, the Department of State Lands, Oregon's federally recognized tribes, landowners, universities, nonprofits, local communities, and other interested parties to pursue a long-term solution for managing the Elliott State Forest. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Questions? Secretary Richardson, any questions or comments?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Liz. And whoa, this chair's really short. Okay. I really want to thank the Department of Forestry for all your years of management of the Elliott and the other lands that we have under your management. At this time, we have one more set of speakers, but I do just want to cue you up as to what we'll do next. We'll be going directly into a discussion about the declaration of the $100 million, because all these people are going to want to know what that means to their interest in the forest. I will give you a quick highlight of the public comments that we received to the Oregon Consensus Report, and then it'll be back to you all to make a decision about where we go next. So with that, Governor, may I call up the last panel?
Please, that'd be great.
All right. Wes Ream and Jim Schaller, and I think I fixed the chair for you.
Good morning, Madam Governor, distinguished members of the board. My name is Jim Schaller. I'm an attorney and I represent Raw Foundation. And Wes Ream, who is sitting at my side here, is the executive director of Raw Foundation, which is an association of 27 Christian self-supporting ministries throughout the state of Oregon. Sometimes as an attorney, you are asked to tilt at windmills And unfortunately, this is one of those times. My client is not a public entity. It is not a governmental entity. It is a private, nonprofit entity that is present in the state of Oregon that wishes to purchase the Elliott Forest for the purpose of recreational activities for its members and for the general public. I am reminded of what Secretary Richardson stated at the beginning of this hearing, that our primary interest should be the benefit of the Common School Fund. And in listening to all of the presentations that were heard today, the primary problem is funding. How do public entities such as the tribes enable them to pay what is necessary to fund the Common School Fund? For that reason, I believe that we should not limit the applications for the purchase of the Elliott Forest to just public entities, governmental entities such as Coos County and the federated tribes. I think we should open it up, the concept of a public-private ownership consortium which can protect the rights of the public to the forest through a series of public access easements and conservation easements. With that said, I'd like to point out that due to the fact that we are in fact tilting at windmills, we have not developed a significant and detailed plan, and therefore do not have too much to address to the board, except to state that it is our intention, if we were able to purchase the forest, that we would do minimal logging only to the extent necessary to take care of good forestry practices. We would be very sensitive to environmental and animal habitat concerns, and we would be willing to restrict our activities to that extent. We are willing to partner with public entities, governmental entities, to achieve our goal. And our goal is, one of the goals, for example, is to build a lodge on or near Loon Lake for a retreat for the Christian ministries. We also wish to operate some campgrounds for the benefit of the Christian community, but those campgrounds would also be open to the public. Specifically, we have an RV park in mind, which would be a campground near Coos Bay, that would be open to the public. The forestry practices that we intend to implement would be confined to thinning the forest and not doing large clear-cut activities on those lands. We would be looking at clearing and cleaning out diseased and dying trees, and basically maintain a harvest limit that allows us to hire the minimum of 40 people. We're not into this to harvest a whole bunch of timber. We're in this to protect, preserve, and enhance Elliott Forest for the good of the ministries and for the good of the public as a whole. And as such, we would ask you to reconsider your decision that only a public entity, a governmental entity, should be able to purchase Elliott Forest. Again, I do not have a detailed a plan for you, but that's only natural because you've closed off the opportunity. I'm just asking for the opportunity to be opened up so that we can address it more fully. Mr. Ream?
I don't have nothing to say. I'm just hoping maybe you'll see it our way.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to have you sit for just a second to see if Secretary Richardson has any questions or comments.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We very much appreciate you joining us today.
I feel like Goldilocks. This is the right chair. All right. We will continue with our agenda. What I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about the declaration for the 100 million. It's actually called the Declaration of Preservation of Non-Economic Benefits for the Elliott State Forest. Did I get that right, Matthew?
Yes.
Yep. So we've had a lot of conversation about the declaration over several months. Lots of attorneys working on it. The department is currently working to complete 2 interagency agreements with the Department of Administrative Services and the Department of Forestry, which will allow the $100 million in bonding approved by the legislature in 2017 to be issued and the proceeds deposited into the Common School Fund. The bonds are expected to be issued in February 2019. So we wanted to recommend to you what we're about to talk about in advance of that issuance. The bonding statute, ORS 283.085 sub 3 sub E, which formerly was Senate Bill 5505 sub 8 sub E, provides only the following general guidance on the use of the bond money. To finance, A, the release of all or a portion of the Elliott State Forest from restrictions resulting from ownership of that forest by the Common School Fund, or B, that's an or, compensation paid to the Common School Fund for the preservation of non-economic benefits of the forest through the imposition, transfer, or sale of restrictions such as easements, use requirements, or other methods that preserve non-economic benefits of the forest for the public, including recreation, aesthetics, wildlife or habitat preservation, or other environmental and quality of life considerations. Given only this general direction, the State Land Board should take formal action to implement this statute. To date, the State Land Board has taken no action. The department, with the assistance of the Oregon Department of Justice and bond counsel through the Treasurer's Office and bond lawyers and lots of lawyers, the department, with the assistance of the Oregon Department of Justice, proposes the attached declaration, Appendix C, for the board's consideration. So we have Appendix C, which at one time was much smaller, but when we had to add the property lines and the property description of the Elliott, it became a much longer document, and that's the bulk of this document. This has been on our website, and the Land Board members have seen it and reviewed it multiple times. So it is before you now. And I believe Treasurer Reed might have a motion.
If you're ready, Madam Chair, I move that the Land Board approve a declaration substantially in the form that we see in Appendix C and delegate to Director Walker the authority to make any final edits that are necessary to correct and clarify the declaration, so long as it doesn't change the scope or purpose, and to sign the declaration on behalf of the board.
Treasurer Reed, thank you for your motion. Secretary Richardson, do you have any questions or comments or a second?
I second the motion.
Okay. So I'm going to, at this point, delay a vote on the motion until after we hear public comment. I want us to proceed through our agenda, but I want us to come back to the motion. Do you I need to make a
I
formal?
can withdraw the motion if
Okay,
that helps.
I'll have you withdraw it, that'd be
Okay.
great. Secretary Richardson, if you'd be willing to withdraw your second,
Okay,
we'll hold until
Withdrawn.
we have an opportunity for public comment.
And Madam Chair, members of the board, I would say that the reason for the motion is that there are some technical fixes that I will need to make as the director of the department, and I will be signing the declaration. But there are some things that need to be added, and I need to have permission to do that. So we'll take that up later.
And I know that we have a handful of folks from the public that would like to testify. I'm not expecting that they would specifically testify on this declaration, but we're certainly open to that for comment if folks want to mention anything about the declaration. Thank you.
All right, so we'll move on to just quickly discuss the public comments that were provided as a result of the Oregon Consensus Report. And I say quickly not to dismiss those, but we've been here a while, we'll be here a little bit longer today. But these comments are in toto on our website. People can link to those. I just want to hit the highlights a little bit. So the Oregon Department of State Lands engaged Oregon Consensus, as you know, a program at the National Policy Consensus Center at Portland State University, as a neutral party to assist with outreach and overall work toward decoupling the Elliott from the Common School Fund. In October 2018, Oregon Consensus Stakeholder completed stakeholder interviews regarding the decoupling. And the report summarized what was heard in the interviews and discussed key themes and considerations for successful decoupling. The department then invited the public to read the final report and provide feedback on the report findings. Feedback was accepted from October 9 to November 15 of this year, and the department received those comments from more than 50 individuals and organizations, and I really appreciate them. Many of them were very thoughtful and detailed about what they'd like to see. As the Oregon Consensus Report indicated, perspectives regarding the future of the Elliott vary widely. Comments received illustrated this range of perspective. Those specific comments often offered highly detailed and nuanced feedback. General themes within the comments include decoupling the forest from the Common School Fund. These comments reflected a variety of perspectives relating to the decoupling, compensating the school fund, and ongoing contributions of the forest to education. And they included several themes that I won't go into here. They are in your packet in Appendix D. Commenters also wanted input on the $100 million that we just spoke about. They wanted specific feedback. They wanted the $100 million to preserve non-economic benefits, to preserve assets not protected by the HCP or the Endangered Species Act, to preserve critical habitats, protect specific forest parcels, and prioritize decoupled land unavailable for logging. The next item was discussing the forest revenue potential. And of course, there were lots of ideas here as well, related both to the purchase of the forest as well as ongoing revenue generation. There were ideas about a harvest tax, carbon credit sales, and timber harvest. Several commenters did not support any solution that required debt to be serviced from commercial logging, or noted that the level of logging they would support would not generate significant revenue. Another issue of concern was the potential public owners, and we've heard from several of those today. Comments support continued public ownership, with many offering support or concern regarding specific public owners. Some commenters indicated that ongoing transparency and public accountability and involvement and oversight by elected officials would not be possible with some public owners. Some commenters indicated concern with ownership that emphasized financial returns, experimental research, or that included ties to timber companies. And some commenters indicated an ownership management partnership by multiple public entities as a possible solution, and that issue was raised here today. Most folks wanted more information. They indicated the ongoing decoupling process should be informed by further examination of specific issues and topics. They want more information about carbon and carbon tax and the role in the market, how the forest can help mitigate climate change, and the non-monetary values of the forest. Use of data, facts, and science to support decision-making was mentioned multiple times, specifically on issues of climate change, carbon, recreational use, and timber production and employment. The development of the Habitat Conservation Plan is largely seen as a good thing. It has multiple issues and roles to play in this process. The forest management approach, many commenters offered specific ideas on future management of the forest and a desire to have more information. They want additional stakeholder and public engagement, and we'll get to that next. We'll talk about what that future engagement might be. And the approach taken to public engagement was noted as extremely important, wanting it to be transparent, allowing public voices in any final decision, and a desire for a process that includes decoupling as well as the Habitat Conservation Plan development. If an advisory committee is formed, the voice of the committee must be heard by the land board. The unlikelihood of advisory committee agreement on some issues was also mentioned, and the process should reflect that the land board is the ultimate decision maker. Finally, many respondents shared their vision of the future for the Elliott, that it's beautiful, wild, and preserved in its natural state, among many other issues. Mostly all ending in the comment that the Elliott State Forest benefits all Oregonians. So we have a synopsis of those comments received in Appendix D, and you can certainly go on our website to learn more about those. So I want to take us to the final item that we need to talk about under Agenda Item 7, and that's direction from the Land Board on next steps for public engagement. As you know, we had a Step 3 that we would involve Oregon consensus in public engagement. I will tell you, Madam Chair, Governor, and members of the board, that I've had conversations with almost all of the folks that have shown interest in the Elliott. And I will tell you, even the environmental community will tell you that the HCP is not a process for stakeholder involvement. It is a process for science. It is a process for the agencies to be involved, any future owner to have their scientists at the table to work through the HCP. To open that up to a stakeholder, large stakeholder group, probably would not be beneficial. I think where the stakeholder group can be of great service is in an advisory committee to help you all decide how to transition this forest into public ownership. A stakeholder committee could be put together to discuss that transition, to discuss funding options, and to bring those ideas back to the board. It's really for you to decide. The department will do whatever your guidance provides. But I wanted to at least get those comments on the table for you as to what I've been hearing with regard to the two distinct processes, a stakeholder engagement and an HCP.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Treasurer Reed? Secretary Richardson? What I'd like to do is
No questions.
move to public testimony. What I would like to do at this point is move to public testimony.
Okay, we'll hold on items 8 through 10.
That'd be great.
Okay.
That'd be great.
All right, I'll step back and put you in command, Governor.
That's great. 2 minutes.
So I think we'll ask for public testimony to be about 2 minutes in length. And I'll ask Jim Schaller, I think you already spoke, so you may not have signed up. Several people may have signed up without knowing that they would already be on board. The next is a panel, Wayne Giese, Bob Zyback, Russ Sapp. And on deck, David Gold, Scott Wheat, and Fergus McLean. Thank you.
We'll get a third chair.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Governor and panel, we've been here before. You've met with Mr. Giese on your own.
Multiple occasions.
Multiple occasions. We're still proposing the same thing. We were against the public sale, and we also stand against the $100 million bond. And reasons being, we think the forest is greatly undervalued, that the appraisal was artificially low, but our concern is for the school kids and the common school fund. We think that the forest is a great opportunity to provide an outdoor classroom for all Oregon students, a research facility for Oregon State, the community colleges, and the high schools. The value of the forest, according to the Giese plan proposal, using the state economist's numbers, was $460 million over the 20-year life of the proposal. It created 430 jobs, mostly in Coos and Douglas County. Did not involve a bond, it retained public ownership, and retained 100% access. In the last 2 years, we worked with Southwest Oregon Community College on a recreation plan for the forest. This is all done with private funding through our 501c3. Everything is available online on the internet. We think that information can be developed into online courses. So we see an opportunity for world-leading research on murrelets, coho, carbon sequestration, lamprey, and spotted owls. A real opportunity, and to involve all the school kids in Oregon without compromising the school fund. The handout I just gave you has the recommendations that the SWAT class we worked with, the forest recreation class last spring developed, and we think that would be a good first consideration for any expenditure of the $100 million. I think I'd like to make another point. Each of us sitting here, and I think Russ will talk more about it. I'm a 5th generation Oregonian. My great grandkids are 8th generation. All of us have been here many generations, and we're all devoted to maintaining the Elliott as a opportunity for our school kids. We think the board was set up in 1859 to manage land, has done great. The Department of Forestry has been contracted to do actual management since 1930 and only recently lost that agreement, and we think that that should be reinstated.
We very much appreciate your testimony. Could you state your name for the record, please?
Bob Zyback, Cottage Grove, PhD from Oregon State College of Forestry.
I said we won't hold that against you.
Thank you.
One of the proposals that's on the table is the OSU forestry program would manage the forest. Do you think that precludes the opportunity for Oregon school children to spend time in and learn more about the forest?
We think there's lots of good forest managers around the state that could work with the school kids through the Department of Forestry, who's mostly educated through Oregon State. We think Oregon State would be hopefully a collaborator with the tribes, with the counties, with the schools, including the community colleges and other universities in the state to conduct research, have that research paid for, not have to pay to do it, but have money generated in order to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zyback. Treasurer Reed, any comments or questions?
No.
Secretary Richardson. Is anybody else on the panel?
No comment.
Wish to testify?
Oh, yes. Russ Sapp?
Thank you for hearing us.
Thank you.
In 1853, there was the first white child born in Tillamook County was named Eudora Trask. That river is named after her father, Elbridge Trask, who wasn't born in Oregon, but she was the first white child born. That's my great-great-grandmother.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm from the Alsea area, serve on many boards. ORECA is one you're familiar with. And we're community-minded. We want to do what's right. And I think the Giese plan addresses some of the funding and opportunities for our kids. I've got two daughters that are both school teachers. One's an administrator. And funding is always a problem. I served on the school board back in the 80s. And so I would like to see an end to our forest wars that have been plaguing us since the listing of the spotted owl or during that period. And from what I've heard today, there are at least opportunities to collaborate on a fix. We have this wonderful resource called trees, and they say, well, money doesn't grow on trees. And they said, yeah, if you cut them, it grows on trees. So beyond that, I would like to see your consideration for what the Giese plan offers, and I'll pass the ball to a guy who I've gone to meetings with over 30 years. He's 98, he's pretty young, and his name is Wayne Giese. So thank you very much.
I think he also served in the legislature. Representative Giese, welcome.
Governor,
it's good to
nice
see
to
you.
see you again. I just like to review two fires and two situations that happened in Oregon that people could choose from. First is, in 1933, the Tillamook fire burned. And I lived in Amity, where I was going to school in Amity, Oregon. And for over a month, you couldn't even see the sun because of the smoke and the haze. So I know really what forest fires can do. But at that time, the state provided that they could go in and harvest the snags, replace some of the situations, help the roads a little. And now we have the Tillamook Forest that serves probably some of the most important areas that need service with those facilities. Portland certainly likes the Tillamook Forest area to recreate in and just know that it's there. The second situation was more recent, was the Biscuit Fire, and it happened in southern Oregon. And in this situation, there were local people there with equipment that were not allowed to go on the ground and put out that fire. Consequently, we ended up with 500 million acres, or 500,000 acres burned there. And we couldn't even go in and harvest the snags or do anything. This is hard for me to believe that we in Oregon know how to handle forests and how to do it. We're not allowed to do some of these things. So it isn't a total state responsibility, but it is the state's responsibility to prevail upon the federal government to make some of those provisions that they can accommodate so these situations wouldn't happen. And so I guess to end up mine, I'm not a newcomer at this thing, and in March I'll be 99, and I'm just hopeful that we can straighten some of this stuff out so that Oregon benefits the most from us. And it could be really a carbon resource area as well as all of these other things that we've already talked about. And I thank you again for the opportunity to come before you.
Thank you, Wayne. It's just delightful to have you here again, and I wish you the best as you roll into 99, and I hope that we all have your energy and an enthusiasm for making the world a better place when we reach your age. So.
You're here.
Well, I have my driver's license till I'm 106, so.
I will say there's a lot of Oregon State Police here. You might not want to advertise that publicly, so thank you.
Governor, may I make one other point?
Sure.
Wayne mentioned the Tillamook burn. In 1962, I was in high school in Portland. I helped plant trees on the Tillamook burn.
Did you
If you
really?
go to the packet we handed out in 1952, it shows 300 kids planting the Vincent burn. We think that the Elliott Forest is an ideal opportunity for that type of ownership of school kids, and that's one reason we believe it's really important to retain the common school fund approach that's been going on successfully since 1859.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you bringing forward this concept. I think that a number of the innovative ideas in this proposal can certainly be used as we move forward. So I really appreciate your time and energy. Thank you.
We're going to keep participating till Wayne's 106 anyhow.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know you do. Go ahead and take a chair and a microphone, and we'll let the others leave and bring up our next panel.
Anyway, I work with these people with SWAC.
Could I have you state
My
your
name's
name?
David Gould.
Thank
and
you.
I represent North Bend High School District, and I don't feel you should decouple the. I don't feel you should decouple the forest. That's such a loss. In other words, the children need to have some of this $1 billion that the timber's worth in their pocket over time somehow. And that's basically what I'm fighting for. And I want to tell you that I do have standing through North Bend. I've taken Children's Land Alliance, I've taken advocates for school trust lands. I have just as much say as Cascade wildlands. And I want you to know that. But I'm representing the children. When I was 8 years old, my grandfather took me into the Elliott Forest, and he told me, "This is your forest. It belongs to the school kids, so they get the money." And I never have forgot that, I never will. And I tell every child I see that's 4 till 20 years old, it's their forest, and I believe that. And you cannot take trees. That forest up there has $1 billion worth of timber. That's carbon. You need to harvest as a carbon forest, and the children deserve that money in their pocket over time, or however you're going to do it. But that's really what I have to say, and I have these to give to you. I'll leave them here.
That'd be great.
And I really respect you for letting me talk, Governor.
Thank you so much for driving up.
I do want to add something, if I may. David Gould worked real close with Jerry Phillips, who operated the forest for, I guess, over 30 years or in that neighborhood. And during that period of time, they raised the cut that they were taking off of the Elliott to 50 million feet a year. And when Phillips ended his term managing the forest, there was more wood on the Elliott Forest than there was when they started. And the same situation is there today. So any harvesting is done there. It doesn't diminish how much wood you have on that ground. And David and Jerry Phillips took Bob Zyback and I for a full day. We traveled the full length of the forest, and every few miles or every mile, David would stop the car and say, "Well, this happened here way back when." And at that time, he had quite a bit of acreage.
Thank you. Wayne, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to stop you. I really appreciate your institutional knowledge and your historic perspective of the forest, but we've got a number of other folks that want to testify. So, and Director Walker's going to get your report.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate you coming. Thank you.
We have Fergus McLean, Barb Shamit, and Josh Laughlin. And on deck are Christina Hubbard and Samuel Schwartz. And that's the end of the list.
Thank you.
Obviously, I haven't stuck closely to the 2 minutes, but I would appreciate if everybody tried to target that. Thank you.
I had it in 60 seconds.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
But since you gave me 2 minutes,
Go ahead.
May I start?
Yes.
Okay. My name's Barb Shamit. I come to you from the West Fork, the Millicoma River, the banks of the river, and I'm very honored to speak to you today and appreciate you having us. And I just want to say you have to have a forest to have a rainforest. That's the first thing I'm going to say. And then I'm going to say, with great respect, an apology for the harsh statements that may follow, or for any inappropriate comments that I may make. And I do not mean to be rude or disrespectful to anyone, because we are all neighbors on this planet. I have nothing but respect for the tribes and for Oregon State University, wherever you are. My son graduated from there. So I have complete respect for everyone in the room, but I am going to be serious. Okay, and also to the Christian ministries, I'd like to say, how about $120 or $120 million donation to the state so that we can keep the forest? That would be my thing with you. Thank you. And I'm here to speak for the owl, for the recurring mussel beds that I finally find in the West Fork in my front yard, for the 2 tiny green tree frogs that recently returned just this past summer. We've come a long way, and perhaps as far back as the Miluke Indians 2,000 years ago, I have reason to believe there were Indians on my land that I occupy now. I'd like to say congratulations to Governor Brown on her recent election, and here it comes, quick 7 points. That $100 million, I believe, is intended to secure the conservation of the old trees, 80 years old and older, specifically to ensure the salmon survival on the South Coast, as we have none anymore. Number 2, an incidental take permit within the HCP is merely a vessel to undermine the Endangered Species Act and ultimately destroy the Elliott State Forest. It needs to be deleted completely from the HCP. That is the vessel they use to take out the owl. Half the forest gone. The Elliott, number 3, is critical to carbon storage, specifically the old trees, 80 years and older. Number 4, OSU, as much as I have respect for this university, God knows, okayed the spray application of Agent Orange in the 70s and 80s. My son was born with a serious birth defect, a lifelong disability. I don't trust the research, although I'm very impressed with today's conservation. Boy, that would be outstanding. Number 5, I am concerned that the tribe's sovereign rights, and I do not mean to be disrespectful, will empower them to clear cut the Elliott with the assistance and backing of the timber industry, because I know they are behind them. Not to be disrespectful. Number 6, the U.S. Forest Service is the best option for the Elliott Forest, or my idea, split it in half and put the half that has not been logged in a protective covenant on the trees 80 years and older. This covenant would run with the land indefinitely and is enforceable by law. I have one on my property bordering the Elliott, and no one will get those trees, not the old ones. And number 7, a gas pipeline running through the forest, a drought-stricken in the summertime, is an insane idea to bring LNG to our coastline and includes high probability for massive forest fire. Thank you, and with respect, the forest has given her all. Please, what is left of her, let it remain to produce oxygen so that we all may breathe. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I give you this?
Sure, I can give it to Director Walker, and we'll get copies made for land board members. Thank you for coming up.
Hi, my name is Fergus McLean. I'm a retired forester. Most of all, I'd like to thank you, Governor Brown, Treasurer Reed, and Secretary Richardson for saving the Elliott Forest. It was great. It was a real act of political courage and leadership that is really lacking and desperately needed. I hope you have before you a really cool color carbon map of forests in the United States, and the little purple on the coast there, the Elliott, you'll see it. I had no idea it was so great. It's rated at excess of 25 tons per hectare of carbon, which translates to more than 10 tons per acre of carbon per year permitted, which is an astounding number, found very few places on the earth. So I would think that your big challenge here is to figure out how to take advantage of this unique value that's found almost nowhere else on Earth. The visionary leadership of Oswald West, probably our greatest public leader, who gave us our public beaches, along with the first state forester and the first head of the OSU School of Forestry, laid out really valuable and I think applicable principles for the Elliott: timber supply, education, and the part that never really happened, and that I'm glad to see OSU here today to possibly build on, is the development of sound forestry practices. The timber wars that culminated in the Northwest Forest Plan reached a settlement that involved the concept of adaptive management, which was to be worked out in experimental forests scattered throughout the Northwest called adaptive management areas. Unfortunately, apparently, bureaucratic infighting among agency scientists killed that, and it never happened. So that's really the reason we have the timber wars today, is if the Northwest Forest Plan was a contingent and was never, can I just summarize?
Go ahead.
The Northwest Forest Plan, adaptive management was never followed out. In my testimony, written testimony, I've suggested to the land board that the Elliott is a logical place to carry out that function of research on adaptive management. The research on industrial forest practices has never taken place. I can guarantee you that. I know it for a fact. I know there was never foundational ecological research on herbicides done. But more than that, there's a raging battle going on between the timber industry and others about what is the best way to sequester carbon. Is it short-term rotation or is it long-term rotation? The Elliott is a perfect place to carry that out. In the process of doing it, the revenue from the industrial model can fund the process, as well as a major set aside for carbon reserves. One last point. At this level of carbon, 10 tons per acre per year, they're valued in the California market today is $15 a ton. That's $150 per ton. An average 1,000 board feet holds about 10 tons of carbon. So you're talking about $150 per thousand. The historic revenue to the state from the Elliott over time total is $250 per thousand. That's at the end of a 60-year rotation. We're talking about every year $150 in value in carbon. I'll leave you with that.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Governor Brown, members of the Land Board. My name is Josh Laughlin. I'm the Executive Director of Cascadia Wildlands, representing our 10,000 members and supporters across the state in the Northwest. Thanks again for the opportunity to weigh in on the ultimate disposition of the Elliott State Forest. We believe that the Land Board's on the right track to entirely decouple the 82,500 acres from the Common School Fund. It's become abundantly clear that logging old-growth forests to fund education in Oregon may have made sense one day, but pitting school children against the environment is just an archaic policy, and therefore we're grateful for the leadership of Governor Brown and eventually the rest of the Land Board to successfully direct the legislature to allocate the $100 million in bonding authority to begin this process. Moving forward, Cascadia Wildlands encourages the following. Ensure that $100 million of bonding revenue is used to decouple specific identifiable acreage of value on the Elliott State Forest from the Common School Fund, and that the land is put into permanent enforceable conservation easements to achieve the non-monetary vision laid out by the Land Board. we've provided maps to the Land Board and to Oregon Consensus and other interested stakeholders of key conservation areas on the Elliott to help begin with this process. Secondly, work with the legislature and other funding, potential funding mechanisms to utilize the trust land transfer program that was enacted actually the same year in the legislature as the bonding allocation was made in 2017, based on a similar model in Washington State, just to the north. The Oregon Trust Land Transfer Program can be used to finance moving encumbered trust lands on state trust lands like the Elliott State Forest out of the school fund into more appropriate uses to ensure clean water, carbon storage to mitigate climate change, big issue our global communities confronting right now, restoration jobs and other values held widely by Oregonians. If you can believe it, Washington State has allocated approximately $60 million each biennium to move encumbered trust lands out of the trust into more appropriate uses. And this is reclassified over 120,000 acres of former trust lands in Washington. It's a mechanism we have in place now. It just needs to be utilized and is going to require the political will in Salem and leadership from our elected officials and Oregonians at large. Lastly, I'd close in saying it's Cascadia Wildlands' desire that any future public ownership outcome is not driven by servicing debt, as we believe this will likely incentivize logging big trees on the Elliott, something that we've been trying to move away from for a couple decades now. Thanks again for your time today. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all. And Josh, would you be willing to get your notes to staff so we can copy them for board members? Thank you. That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you all for being here.
I bet I came the longest way. I came all the way up.
Christine Hubbard, Samuel Schwartz, that's the last two. Same advice. I'm not doing a great job on keeping it to 2 minutes, but all of your respect for that would be great. And if you'd state your name for the record.
Christina Hubbard, Executive Director of Forest Web of Cottage Grove. Didn't drive as far as Barb. And I'm going to cut this down from the 3 minutes I planned to try to. Our main requirement for the Elliott is that it remains a public forest with established guidelines in place for the preservation of all old growth and late successional habitat, as well as riparian areas with significant buffers established for these ecosystems. There should also be connectivity maintained between these habitats with no large gaps created by the clear cuts. We strongly recommend whatever plan is accepted that logging should be restricted to thinning and restoration projects throughout the Elliott. As for the future ownership of the Elliott, the report cites the ability to manage the forest as well as to raise the remaining cash reserves for the school fund to be the primary criteria. Of all the options listed in the report, only the U.S. Forest Service currently meets those requirements. The report states, as an adjacent landowner and manager, the United States Forest Service indicated interest in seeing the Elliott State Forest consolidated into and managed as part of the Siuslaw National Forest. Not only is the U.S. Forest able to provide proper management, it is also in the best position to provide the required financial resources for the school fund. Finally, of great concern to us is what is missing from the report. No mention was made of climate change or the role the Elliott could play in mitigating this global crisis. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their latest report in September. The report makes it clear we need not only to reduce future emissions, but move away from fossil fuels and focus on the removal of carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere. According to most scientific studies and reports, forests are the key to saving our planet. With the federal government taking little or no action on this critical issue, it is imperative Oregon, with its vast forest lands, lead the way in providing solutions. Under carbon, Section 4, subsection 4.5, the Oregon Consensus Report states, among the constraints cited were the relatively large and older class of trees already on the Elliott, which reduces their potential carbon uplift and therefore value on the carbon market. This statement is not accurate, nor is it based on current science. Recent studies show old-growth trees are rich and valuable carbon sinks, continuing to sequester carbon throughout their life cycles. Our written comments that we have submitted today cite relevant studies that provide confirming data. We acknowledge the issues of how to decouple the Elliott from the school fund, how to provide for the school fund, and who will manage the forest in the future. But what we manage the Elliott for is the most critical issue that needs to be addressed, and climate change must be factored into this discussion when making any management decisions moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Governor Brown, Tobias Reed, and Secretary of State, if he's still with us. My name is Samuel Joseph Schwartz. I was born on the West Fork of the Millicoma, nestled right into the Elliott State Forest. That was my school ground, and gosh, you know, I've been following this since day one. I've gone to all the meetings, starting in Coos Bay, you know, at the firehouse with Arnie Roblin and Caddy McEwen. I've been shoulder to shoulder with Tobias. I've written letters. I wrote a letter, was it through the Oregon League of Conservation Voters in support of the $100 million bonding money to figure out a way, and it's not necessarily to remove the children from the picture, you know, and the money going towards their education. It's to remove the economic driver that requires the removal of precious resources, which I think is more valuable than anything else that we have in this state, is our natural resource, not to be extracted, but to be admired and learned from. To recap, and I think it was in 2011 that started this whole mess, was the land board's decision to increase logging by 60%, and that's kind of what got us into this whole mess. So any plan that goes backwards in increasing logging in the Elliott again, where 20,000 acres are preserved in riparian areas and readjusted, that sounded a lot like a Lone Rock timber proposal that was rejected. So we'll fight tooth and nail to preserve that, or to prevent that from happening, excuse me. I'm really excited to hear more of OSU and what they have to offer in research and potential facilities within the forest, and creating more of an ecological-minded approach to forest management, and not just 80-year rotations, but actual reforestation of all of Oregon, and how that could be expanded throughout the world. We're facing this crisis. I mean, Brazil, they're tearing that up down there too on the Amazon. It's horrible what's going on the planet, and there's no more time for moderate politics. We need to act now, and we need to act boldly. And we have a great platform to launch from, and this offers a lot of opportunity for Oregon as a state in this country that is very divided to make a large statement on the global scene. So I hope that we explore more of those avenues. Let's see.
That could be a good place to stop.
Yeah, that might be it. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. We certainly appreciate all the comments made this morning, and appreciate your time and energy and your thoughtful consideration of the issues. Director Walker, do you want to come on forward? I think we should take the declaration issue first.
Madam Chair, if you're ready, I'm happy to make the motion again. I move that the land board approve a declaration substantially similar to what we see in Appendix C, delegate to Director Walker the authority to make any edits that are necessary to correct or clarify it without changing the scope or the intent, and to sign that declaration on behalf of the land board.
Thank you, Treasurer Reed. Secretary Richardson, you seconded this motion earlier. Are you willing to second it again?
Yes.
Thank you. Seeing that we have a motion and a second, and seeing no objection to the motion, I'm going to order the motion so approved. Thank you.
Are we on to general discussion, Madam
Yes,
Chair?
general discussion.
Thank you. I'd like to take a few minutes, because I've been thinking a lot about this, as I'm sure you and the Secretary have. So let me run through some thoughts. First, I'm really grateful for all the presentations we heard today. I think the consensus report, the expressions of interest, and the testimony that we heard give us a lot of good ideas, a lot of useful information about how we can achieve decoupling. But as I was thinking about today and preparing for it, I was worried about two potential consequences of what we've been up to lately. First, I was worried that to many observers, this conversation might feel like we were going back to square one, returning in some ways to conversations that the land board has been having for years, if not decades. And my staff and I have been asked on a number of occasions in the last little while, didn't we do this already? I'm also aware, aside from that confusion, that there are a lot of parents and organizations who are representing education stakeholders who are anxious about the land board's ability to successfully decouple the Elliott from the Common School Fund. They're, I think, looking for momentum, a sense of progress from us, and I think it's fair to say that their patience is probably not infinite. There are obviously also a lot of people who are anxious about how the forest will be managed after decoupling and how the state will protect the conservation elements of the Elliott and ensure that the public will continue to be able to access the forest for recreational purposes. All of this is to underscore my strong feeling that I think is consistent with what you said, Governor, that we need to continue narrowing the options that are in front of us, particularly, in my view, to those options that meet our core assumptions of public ownership and access, full decoupling, strong conservation features, and of course meeting our obligation to the Common School Fund. In short, I think we need to keep moving forward. The second thing I was worried about was that we were somehow creating the impression that we're approaching the future of the Elliott as some sort of auction, as if we were simply asking who has $120 million, yes, with some conservation elements with which they could buy the Elliott. I'm worried that we're creating the impression that the only thing we're concerned about is the dollars. From my perspective, this is not an auction. Of course, we have to meet our obligation to the Common School Fund, but as much as it might feel like we're selling the Elliott, I think the reality is that what we're talking about is a whole lot bigger than that. I think we're talking about the future of the Elliott as a whole and how it fits into a much broader set of public interests. As we settle those questions, those fundamental, almost existential questions, then we can start to answer the practical questions that follow. What would it take to transform the Elliott from a common school asset into a different type of forest with a different mandate and a potentially different ownership structure? It seems to me that what we really need is a conversation that, like those that stem from a trust land transfer process. That's one of the reasons I'm really glad that the legislature and the governor were able to refine and enact the concept that I introduced as a legislator, because that puts that process into place. And I think it's going to be very helpful to us as we proceed. Now, I want to be clear about something else. I am really excited about the vision that Dean Davis and OSU articulated today. It seems clear to me that that vision is entirely consistent with what the land board has already articulated as a direction. OSU, it seems to me, sees value in a contiguous 80,000 plus acre research forest that provides for public access and recreation. They see a strong conservation component on that landscape, and in what I think distinguishes it from a lot of positive aspects of the other things we heard, they see a strong research component that will inform the future not only of timber management, but of climate change adaptation and response, significant potential for tribal partnerships, and of course support for rural communities. Madam Chair, Mr. Secretary, I think this is a really big opportunity for us as a state to answer some really big questions that will define who we are in the decades to come, and I'm ready to endorse that vision of a research forest on the Elliott. From where I sit, I see that potential in the research, and I'd like the staff at DSL to begin working with OSU to sketch out a work plan that would inform the questions that need to be answered. It seems to me that embracing the vision of a research forest with OSU leading that conversation would also allow DSL to move forward with its HCP contractor and federal agencies, and we've already heard very articulately how important that's going to be to the Elliott's future. I would ask, Madam Chair, that the work plan include a process for stakeholder engagement. We've talked about that already, including the involvement of local and tribal governments. I think it needs to begin answering the questions about those governance structures, how to engage the legislature and other potential funders on how a financing package might come together, maybe using the trust land transfer process that's recently been enacted. And I think it should include support for OSU as it works to help DSL put together the Habitat Conservation Plan and build public support for research forest. I know there's a lot of work still ahead of us when it comes to the Elliott, but I'm really excited about this direction and this momentum. I'm hoping that a year from now we're going to be sitting here looking at a fully developed plan that'll position us with the Elliott Research Forest as a national and global leader, as the President said well. So I have a motion. I'm happy to pause or make that motion as to your preference.
Why don't you hang on with your motion, and
Okay.
we'll see if Secretary Richardson has any comments or questions.
Well, I'd like to see a partnership of OSU, the counties, and the tribes without further general fund bonding. In my opinion, this would be best for the schools, for the economy, and for the taxpayers. These are my comments.
Thank you, Secretary Richardson. I think I very much appreciate the time and energy that a number of the parties have put into these proposals. I think for me, I'm very interested and intrigued by the vision laid out by OSU and the Forestry Center there. I do think it's an opportunity, and I heard from a number of folks that they want to keep the forest for the children, and I do think we can move forward on this path and keep the forest for the benefit of Oregon school children, probably in a different way, maybe a less of a financial resource and more of an educational resource for the next 7 generations. I also, I probably differ a little bit from Secretary Richardson. I think the county certainly should be involved and certainly be part of the engagement process. I don't see the tribes as stakeholders. I see them as sovereign nations, and believe that not only should Coos and Cow Creek, but Coquille be part of this conversation moving forward. I suspect that Grand Ronde and Siletz will also want to participate in the conversation as well, and that seems appropriate to me. But I do think we have an incredible opportunity to set a path for the future that recognizes the challenges we are facing due to climate change on our forests. I think, Anthony, you articulated really well that this would be a unique opportunity for Oregon to lead not only the nation, but perhaps the entire world in terms of research on this particular forest. I think given what's happening with climate change and with how we have managed our lands, I'll pick on the federal agencies since they're not here, I don't think, but clearly well, they are? Okay,
Yeah,
we've got a
they're
few folks here. I will just talk about federal management of public lands generally. That, you know, certainly we are at the perfect storm in terms of federal management of public lands and what's happening with climate change. And I do think we have an opportunity to provide, to create a new path forward. And I think OSU really has the ability to deliver on that vision, as well as ensuring that our children have an opportunity to learn from and engage from that. My recollection is that the Oregon Outdoor School program is housed at OSU as well. And so this might provide a different type of perfect storm in terms of educational opportunities for our students. So I want to continue to support where we're going and narrowing the focus. And look forward to hearing your motion, Treasurer Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's very consistent with what we've both just said. I move that we direct Director Walker and staff at DSL to commence work with Oregon State University and other agency partners on developing a plan to transform the Elliott into a research forest, to include a timeline for submitting a habitat conservation plan and an outline for engaging stakeholders on the range of public benefits, including recreation access, conservation, working forest research.
Thank you. Secretary Richardson, comments?
Second motion.
Great. We have a motion that is seconded, and hearing and seeing no objection, that motion is approved. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We've got a couple, for those of you who are interested in State Land Board agenda items, we've got a couple of more issues on the table, so we're gonna continue while some of you quietly leave the room.
Emphasis on
Thank you, Director Walker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Governor, and members of the board. And I do want to say on the Elliott, before we move on, and I have Peggy Lynch from the League of Women Voters beating down my door. The public will have an opportunity to talk about the HCP,
Great.
but it's during the NEPA process.
Great, thank you.
So they will have an opportunity.
And I have Peggy scheduled to testify on item number 9 if she's still interested. So, okay.
All right.
Let's move on to item number 8.
Thank you. I'm going to take item 8 and 9 in tandem because they are sort of related. Okay, I'm going to need people to...
I motioned, I'm hoping they're going
Okay.
to quiet the peanut gallery down a little bit so we can continue our work.
All right, so item 8 and 9 are in tandem, and why I say that is because the resolution on item 9 acknowledges that the land board would support moving unclaimed property division to the state treasury. So let me give you a little background. As I've mentioned before, when I was hired here to take a look at the core mission of the agency and efficient operations, I was also presented with 2 opportunities that members felt could create additional money or more efficiency under the Common School Fund allocations through structural reform. One of those options was to move unclaimed property to the Department of Treasury. Is that what you're called?
I would say, Madam Director, we're an independent constitutional office, but we'll be fine with that.
So in my work, we did a lot of homework, and we attended some association meetings. There has been some outreach on behalf of the Treasurer's Office with education beneficiaries, as well as our department, about their feelings about moving the function over to Treasury. I will say the large majority of unclaimed property programs are administered by state treasurers because state treasurers have a ready-made platform to make citizens aware of unclaimed property. They have more connections with financial institutions, and the National Association of Unclaimed Property Administrators, otherwise known as NAPA, is an affiliate network within the National Association of State Treasurers, known as NAST. NAPA regularly offers professional development workshops and best practice seminars during those conferences, and Jean Strait, our Deputy for Administration, and I both attended one of those. From the national perspective, 35 states have unclaimed property in their state treasurer's office. 35 states. 7 states in the Department of Revenue, 4 in the Controller Office, 1 in the State Auditor's Office, and then 2 at State Lands, us and North Dakota. Oregon ranks 41st in the nation in per capita collection of unclaimed property and 35th in per capita return of unclaimed property. Improving our collection of those things would achieve two important goals. It would return more money and property back to Oregonians who own it, and it would bolster the Common School Fund, allowing us to give more back to the education system. Currently, about 1/3 of the Common School Fund is unclaimed property. Now, I will never say to you, nor would I ever believe it, that my staff here doesn't do a great job. They do a terrific job at collecting unclaimed property. We are a very, very small staff. I fully expect in the Treasurer's office that you will expand that staff and expand the opportunities that you can afford to do to help this program run more smooth. With the staff that we have, we do a fantastic job. And we only have 2 people assigned to working the estates program, and they have to go out. There were, I believe, over 500 estates last year that people died without a will, and we have to go out into those homes and liquidate the property and manage the estates. So this is, again, once more, my opportunity to say, please, Oregonians, get a will. And so what I'm asking you in Agenda Item 8 is to support the legislative concept 686 that would authorize the Department of State Lands to support movement of this program, unclaimed property and estates, over to Treasury. It's a big bill. It's in Appendix A, and it cites a number of statutes, and I have only pulled out the relevant statutes that are under the Land Board per some help from our esteemed counsel, Matt DeVore. So that would be Agenda Item 8. Agenda Item 9, if I can take that up next, is a resolution that the Land Board would like to put forward, I believe, to support increased efficiency to benefit the Common School Fund. I won't read the resolution preamble. It's there for folks to see, but one of the issues is that the South Slough, while it is the South Slough National Estuarine Reserve, provides education and important environmental research, members of the Land Board have expressed interest in finding opportunities to increase efficiency and reduce costs to the Common School Fund by finding alternative sources of funding or management. As I mentioned at a previous board meeting, we spend about $900,000 a year out of the Common School Fund to support the activities of the South Slough. And I will be prepared in February to give you a very much more detailed report about the stakeholder involvement that I have engaged in with regard to this concept. I'm still in the middle of it. In fact, yesterday I spent over an hour talking to Mike Graybill, who was, I think, the second manager of the South Slough, and he spent 28 years there. So I learned the history of how the funding got switched over from general fund to Common School Fund and how that all happened. So I will share all of that and the stakeholder involvement and the conversations we've had with the University of Oregon and tribes in February. But at this point, this resolution would be it resolved by the State Land Board that we, the members of the State Land Board, call on the Oregon Legislative Assembly to pass legislation moving management of the Unclaimed Property Division from the Department of State Lands to the State Treasury in order to improve efficiency and increase funding for the Common School Fund. And be it further resolved that we, the members of the State Land Board, call on the Oregon Legislative Assembly to pass a bill shifting South Slough management costs from the Common School Fund to other sources and/or identify alternative management options to avoid continued diversion of these funds from their intended use for the benefit of the school children of Oregon. I would say finally that it is not practical for us to divest ownership of the South Slough. I have at least learned that much information, and so we would be looking at management, shifting management opportunities, or finding alternative funding. But it appears that divesting of ownership would be very complicated and next to impossible to do given the constraints of the deeds and the NOAA commitments to the program and their requirements.
Great. Director Walker, I'm going to bring up Peggy Lynch from the League of Women Voters to talk about the South Slough. And she's going to make it brief since she knows that we are rapidly reducing our lunch hours. Hours, right, yeah.
My parking only lasts till 1 anyway.
Okay, good, all right.
Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon. We acknowledge and hats off regarding the fact that you are doing your best to be stewards of the Common School Fund and trying to do the right thing. We have a particular interest in the South Slough National Estuarine Reserve. Our local Coos League has volunteers and has been involved, and I believe some of our members actually even have donated some of the property over the years. And so I was just pleased to hear Director Walker's comments that in fact this is not totally moving forward and that we're still working all of this out. As soon as I heard at the last meeting that you were having this conversation,
she activated her network.
I did reach out to people who had a real personal interest, including Mike Raybill and others, to make sure that you had the full understanding, because this is a national treasure. It's not just an Oregon treasure. It was the first one ever created. And so it is really important. And frankly, it has an intended use for the benefit of school children of Oregon, just as the Common School Fund does. So what we are concerned about is having, and I'm glad to see that perhaps ownership isn't going to happen, we're just really concerned to make sure that there is an investment and that this goes forward, because the dollars used are matching dollars oftentimes for federal grants that help actually enhance this particular entity. So thank you for your time, and thank you, Director Walker, for the increased information, and we will continue to follow this.
Great, thank you, Peggy. We very, very much appreciate you being here, and I think at least from my perspective, the ownership issue is, we're not going to have that conversation. I think we're really looking at, is this the appropriate funding source to manage and provide resources? So thank you, and travel safely.
Thanks.
All right.
I did elevate that chair. It went down again. It's a magic
Probably
chair.
something's wrong. All right, so we've got items number 8 and 9, and do we have a motion, a combined motion? Treasurer Reed.
Madam Chair, I'd suggest that since both of these are aimed at the legislature, we could combine them. So I would move that we adopt the resolution in item number 9 and endorse LC 686 and approve DSL staff support to pass what will eventually become a bill.
All right. Secretary Richardson. Thank you. Got a second? Everybody's hungry. Second, seeing and hearing no objection, the motion is approved.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll
And
move on.
last item, I think.
Yeah, we'll move, we just have 2 other short ones. Item 10 is to reappoint 1 voting member of the Oregon Ocean Science Trust. I do not believe Dr. Sumich is in the room. No, he's not. Okay, thank you. There are 2 openings, 2 vacancies on the trust currently, but only 1 is available for reappointment, and Louise Soliday, the executive director, is working on trying to find someone else to fill that vacancy. Dr. Sumich is retired. He's already served 1 4-year term, is anxious to serve another. He's a former professor of marine biology and zoology at Grossmont College, Community College in California, a marine mammal expert, marine biology textbook author. Louise tells me he represents OOST on the Ocean Acidification Hypoxia Coordinating Council, which, by the way, I will tell you the legislature fully funded that.
Great.
with a staffer, and this OOST is not funded. Just getting my tip in there for Louise. And he also serves on the Oregon Coast Ocean Information Network as the representative from OOST. So I would recommend the State Land Board reappoint Dr. Sumich to another term ending December 31, 2022.
Treasurer Reed.
Madam Chair, Madam Director, do we know, you said he wants this?
Yes.
Is he a good member? Is he
yes.
productive and contributing?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
I did check with Louise Soliday last night. We exchanged emails.
Very good. Madam Chair, I move that we accept the staff recommendation and reappoint Dr. Jim Sumich to OOST.
Thank you, Treasurer Reed. Secretary Richardson, is there any objection to our moving to reappoint Dr. Sumich to the OOST, Oregon Ocean Science Trust Board?
No objection.
Thank you. No objection from the chair. Seeing no objection, motion is approved.
All right. Madam Chair, members of the board, we traditionally have an other. I've kept it to one subject because it's been a long meeting and it's an important subject, so I need to share it with you. It is an update on the Jordan Cove removal fill application. The department received a removal fill permit application for the Jordan Cove Energy Project on November 7, 2018. The department determined the application to be complete on December 6 under our 30-day review period. An application is deemed complete if it contains enough information for the department and the public to make an informed evaluation of a proposed project's effects, available alternatives, and whether proposed mitigation is enough to offset anticipated effects. Neither Oregon revised statutes nor Oregon administrative rules allow for the public to comment on whether an application is complete. And I have some cranky people about that, but the public comment comes after a determination of completeness. The public comment period began December 6 and will remain open until February 3 at 5 p.m. It provides an opportunity for interested parties to provide their input on the proposed removal fill activity. Input is used to determine what additional information may be required, issues that may need to be addressed, and ultimately to inform the department's permit decision and to develop permit conditions needed to protect Oregon's water resources. Many Oregonians across the state are interested in the proposed Jordan Cove project. In developing our approach to public comment, it was important for the department to do two things: provide multiple ways for people to comment and learn about what is being proposed, and to reach as many people as possible who wish to have input. The resulting review and comment period includes 60 days rather than the standard 30 days to provide comment, multiple news releases and email notices regarding application and comment period status, 2 mailings to landowners and adjacent landowners regarding comment opportunities, a dedicated Jordan Cove informational website, and a newly dedicated Jordan Cove email, jordancove@dsl.state.or.us. Please use that email and do not use my email. You are cluttering my inbox, and it's becoming very difficult to see my email, and I am forwarding those emails to the Jordan Cove comment box, so it will save you a step if you do that. Making the Jordan Cove removal fill permit application materials available via the web at 5 local libraries along the 232-mile pipeline route, because those are the only large enough libraries to accommodate the 6 binders, and hard copies are available upon request. Opportunities are available to comment via web form, email, as I just mentioned, postal mail, and at one of 5 public hearings. We took your advice, Governor. We expanded the hearing schedule.
Thank you very much to you and your team who was willing to accommodate the time and energy to make sure that that happens.
Yes, Governor, I am delaying my knee surgery until after the public hearing schedule. I decided it was best to wait and at least hear from the public. There are 5 hearing locations around the state: Klamath Falls on the 7th, Jackson County Fairgrounds on the 8th, and I'm talking January, Canyonville at the Seven Feathers Resort on the 9th, North Bend, the Mill Casino on the 10th, and in Salem here the following Tuesday on the 15th. We had planned on having it here in the land board room, but we are looking for an alternate location nearby that can accommodate more folks. Times and formats create an open, accessible, and easy opportunity for the public to provide comments. We're doing it in the evenings from 5:30 to 8. We are working to ensure as many people as possible are heard. We're continuing to finalize and adjust the details to ensure a smooth flow of comments and questions. We also are extending an opportunity for elders age 65 and up to comment early in the public hearing so they don't have to wait, and we are exploring translation needs and options so we comply with the Environmental Justice Task Force. The department has also reached out directly to tribes to open discussions on this application and provide opportunity for formal government-to-government consultation if requested. The comment period, as I indicated, ends February 3 at 5 p.m., at which time the department's technical staff will begin a 30-day review unless extensions are agreed to because of the volume of comments. We are having the comments at these public hearings transcribed, so that's taking some time as well. And issues relevant to the removal fill law will be sent to the applicant to address. The applicant will then address those comments in writing through project revisions, additional information, or other action as appropriate. And finally, I'd like to refer the land board, tribes, and members of the public to the memorandum I previously provided to you on June 11, 2018, that clarifies the department and the state land board's role regarding the Jordan Cove Energy Project application. Existing statutes and rules place the obligation on the department and the director for deciding whether to approve or deny the removal fill application currently out for review. There are no items in the current application that would require land board approval. So that is my report on the Jordan Cove Energy Project application. We don't have a lot of folks here on that today, so I'm assuming they're all waiting to testify after the holidays, and we look forward to every minute and every day of our journey on that week.
Thank you, Director Walker, and again, I want to say thank you to you and your team for taking what I think is an extraordinary effort to make sure that the voices of Oregonians are heard every single step of the way. Treasurer Reed, any comments?
No, thank you, Governor.
Secretary Richardson, any closing comments for today?
No, thank you.
Thank you for your time and energy. I think with there being no further business before the State Land Board, we are adjourned.